Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
I'm monitoring for a number of things.
Easing COVID-19 restrictions. What will it take in BC? Also,
We've made this information culturally relevant. They feel heard.
How BC's South Asian community dramatically cut its COVID case numbers. And
I don't think it's fair to be so dismissive of it and say that, people are fear-mongering.
We need to call them.
facing backlash for telling people to stop spreading rumors, the RCMP tries to reassure the public about 2 missing women cases.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. Well, COVID-19 cases appear to be slowing in BC, the curve inching downward ever so slightly.
So what might that mean for restrictions here in our province? Could they be lifted anytime soon?
Our Tina Lovegreen is live with us tonight after looking into that. Tina, is Dr. Henry giving any hints as to when things might change?
Well, Anita, so far there's no indication that we're going to see those restrictions rolled back anytime soon, especially when we're seeing case numbers in the 400 range. But Dr. Henry did hint that she is hoping to ease restrictions as soon as it's safe to do so. And, she wants to be confident that once we do open up more, we don't go back to those old restrictions again. Here are the 3 things she says she's looking for.
I'm monitoring for a number of things. Fewer cases in our communities, fewer outbreaks or unchecked transmission in places around the province. These are important signs that we are ready. Also, having a better understanding of where the variants of concern are and how they're getting into our community.
And these variants are a concern because, as we've heard over and over again, they're more easily transmissible.
Okay, Tina, let's get an update on those variants. How many of the new variants are we actually seeing here in BC?
Well, so far we have seen 40 cases of the new COVID-19 variants here in BC. We know that 25 of them are from the UK variant, mostly linked to international travel, and 15 cases of the South African variant. So far, BC hasn't detected any of the US or Brazilian variants. But if we do see these variants take off, Dr. Henry says we could be facing a new pandemic.
We are all tired of this, but it can lead us into a brand new charge of increased numbers of cases if we don't keep doing what we're doing. And I think people in BC recognize that, and we need to continue to make sure we're stopping those chains of transmission.
So these variants could really change the game, especially if they become dominant in our community, which is why health officials are urging people to stick to those safety protocols, or the impacts could be devastating. Mike, Anita?
All right, Tina, thanks very much. Tina Lovegreen reporting for us tonight. And here's the latest on BC's vaccination program tonight. The province is still on track to start mass vaccination clinics in March for the general public over the age of 80. Dr. Bonnie Henry says for people in that group, they'll get more information in the coming days and weeks. You'll be told where your vaccination clinic will be and hopefully when. After vaccinating people 80 and over, the next round of shots in BC will start going down in 5-year age increments.
And those doses are sorely needed. 13 more people have died of COVID-19 in BC since Friday. The province also reporting more than 1,200 new cases today. Still, active cases now sits at just under 4,000, continuing the downward trend. 234 people are in hospital with the disease. That figure has also been sliding since the new year. 69 people are in ICU.
And BC's South Asian community is being praised for its efforts to bring down COVID-19 case numbers. Since the fall, there's been a significant drop in transmission of the virus.
Members of the community told me there was a lot of finger pointing back then because South Asian numbers were high. So take a look at why there's now been a decline.
Then there were some family members that did say, oh, don't tell anybody.
Gurvi Dillon says he, like many people in the South Asian community, felt shame when he was diagnosed with COVID-19.
You're kind of embarrassed, right?
He ended up being hospitalized for 33 days, even put on a ventilator. But by the time he came out, attitudes among South Asians had started to change.
I do see a big time improvement from the people saying their the more educational we get on COVID, the better it is for our community.
BC doesn't track race-based COVID data, but the Fraser Health Authority is home to the 3 municipalities with the highest percentage of South Asians in the province. All have seen significant drops in COVID numbers, Surrey cutting cases by more than half since November. Part of the reason, restrictions put in place by the province, but Fraser Health also credits community organizations.
I think there's been a huge amount of commitment from our partners, ranging from gurdwaras, schools, to community agencies, to businesses and media outlets to really support.
The South Asian COVID Task Force has played a big role, translating public health orders into culturally relevant information.
So infomercials, radio, TV, in languages people understand. WhatsApp blast channels, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok.
They wanted to help eliminate the unconscious bias they were seeing associated with rising case numbers in Fraser Health as people pointed fingers at the South Asian community. They didn't want the negativity to make the situation worse.
The feedback we've gotten is that they see themselves in the infographics. We've done some skits where they see scenarios and they feel like they understand the public health messaging.
Transmission rates can change at a moment's notice, but for now, the South Asian community sees the downward trend as a victory, with the hope of more improvement to come. Really important to tell this story, just like we did with the Chinese community when cases actually started to drop there. We have seen a lot of finger pointing throughout the pandemic, for sure.
That's for sure. Nice to see those numbers coming down in Fraser Health for certain. Well, in the middle of a pandemic, claustrophobic train rides and winding lineups at bus bays are a pain of the past, but it's also proving painful for TransLink's operating budget.
In the next
public
episode
transit is in trouble. With low ridership, virtually every public transit provider.
In the next episode of About Here, Yute Lee looks into how COVID-19 has changed the way people get around the city. Stay tuned for About Here later this hour, where Yute tells us about the ripple effect of reducing public transportation.
Well, following days of criticism over what was seen as a lackluster response to recent missing persons cases, tonight an apology of sorts from the RCMP.
It comes as they investigate the disappearances of 2 women in the Fraser Valley.
Our Susanna De Silva looks at finding the balance between police work and validating the public's concerns.
Good morning. If you are a woman in British Columbia, I need you to listen to this very closely.
It was the RCMP's response to this viral video that drew criticism after asking people to stop spreading rumors about attempted abductions. They came out today apologizing for what was seen as an insensitive response.
Certainly that language was not meant to dismiss, nor was it meant to upset or anger anybody.
The posts have been shared widely, connecting recent cases of missing women and reports of attempted abductions by people in white vans.
This one it hit a nerve just because, like myself, and I've had personal friends who've, either been harassed by somebody, stalked, followed home. Like, there's been things that have happened. They've been reported to the police and it's kind of brushed off.
Many of those sharing the posts also sharing their own stories. But on Saturday, the RCMP put out a statement asking people to stop spreading rumors, followed up by a clarification last night that they do take all investigations seriously.
They may not necessarily be connected, and I understand their perspective, from that aspect of it, but I don't think it's fair to be so dismissive of it and say that, people are fear-mongering.
Dismissed is exactly how many of those who work with victims of violence felt about the police response.
What we don't want, I think, is for the police to be in a position where they're silencing those that want to raise concerns, but rather to create opportunities for us to discuss, which is a serious social problem. A social problem that the police have a very, very bad track record, both in terms of how they investigate, and whether or not victims and survivors are believed.
You know, the idea behind issuing those statements was to try to alleviate some of the social media frenzy that was going on, trying, really causing people great distress.
The RCMP is now trying to reassure the public, saying they have looked into the cases of missing people and found no links so far. As far as abductions in white vans, they are investigating allegations of a man being forced into a white van and 3 other incidents.
People reported a suspicious white van, but there was no interaction between the people and the person inside the van. And so, I mean, there's nothing to indicate that there was any abduction that occurred or even any attempted abduction occurred.
Dr. Farah Shroff studies violence against women and understands why women feel safer sharing online with their friends, but worries fear could also keep women inside.
It possibly and probably didn't take into account the severe PTSD that many women who have been violated experience on a day-to-day level.
We definitely have a societal issue going on in general where women just don't feel safe.
The woman who made one of the original posts declined an interview, but says she is glad the videos have sparked a conversation about the fears women are experiencing. Susanna Da Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
Investigators are trying to figure out how someone was killed at a home in the small village of Sayward on the northeast coast of Vancouver Island on Saturday.
When they got there, they found the man was suffered life-threatening injuries and he died on the way to the hospital.
Police say they initially arrested a man in connection to the incident, but he has since been released. Officers believe this is an isolated incident and there is no risk to the public. The Major Crimes Unit is coordinating with the BC Coroner Service and forensics in the investigation. Anyone with information is asked to contact Major Crimes.
Well, a lucky elk will live to see another day, thanks to a man who saw the animal get buried in an avalanche in Field, BC. The man who swooped in to help happened to be in the right place at the right time. Take a look at this. 32-year-old Jesse Dahlberg was overseeing railroad crews triggering avalanches on Mount Dennis when he saw a wall of snow barreling towards the elk. He and a family friend immediately drove over to the site where they found the elk still alive. He dug through heaps of snow until a path was cleared for the elk to stumble out.
Well, we were expecting lots of sunshine this week in Vancouver and some cold temperatures, but there was a bit of a surprise in the skies this afternoon. Snowfall hit early this afternoon, much to the delight of people across the city. It was, however, a brief flurry with the skies clearing just after a couple of hours.
All right, let's bring in meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe now, bracing to be mocked by friends and relatives back east for our blizzard of the
Too late,
century.
it's already happened.
Can I just preface that we were almost fighting right now over who got to throw to you, because I was really excited about this, and
that's really funny.
I knew Mike was going to have a bad attitude about it.
It was a perfect snowfall. It was there for what? A few minutes, and then everything went away.
This is so funny. Yeah, I wonder who the delighted ones were, Anita, that you were alluding to in the
I was stuck inside.
Well, it was beautiful. I did manage to get out. It's kind of a dream snowfall for Vancouver. Just a 2-hour window, a quick hit, back to blue skies. We cannot guarantee that every time. But yeah, nice little convergence, an unexpected convergence thanks to the outflow winds that are starting to bring that cold air towards the coast, and then breezes from the ocean. And that created lift, sort of like pop-up thunderstorms. So they were really isolated, but of course hard to nail down in advance. Let me take you to the current temperatures right now. That is, of course, our big story this week. The freezing mark right now at YVR, hanging on to below zero temperatures in through the valley. Abbotsford at a -2 and Hope at a -1. I want to show you the big picture because this is all part of the first polar vortex to descend across Canada. That's really just the Arctic circulation that does move down across Canada a couple times a year. It is very late this season in arriving across the prairies. -25 wind chills in temperatures, I should say, in Winnipeg. That will translate to -40 to -50 temperatures across the prairies. And in through northern BC, we had our first -40 temperature this morning in through Dawson Creek. Take a look at that Arctic air mass in the whites as it sort of swirls around the prairies as we head into Wednesday. That's what we're expecting to see, a taste of the true Arctic air. Look at those whites getting down towards the coast. That, again, is the heart of the Arctic air. Not often that we see it down in through our neck of the woods. Of course, it will be slightly modified by the ocean temperatures, but we're still talking minus double-digit wind chills into the next couple of mornings before temperatures moderate out a bit, I think, early next week. And we will be watching a bit of snow for Wednesday as the true Arctic air mass does get down to the south coast. Just want to show you those warnings, not just for BC, but for all of Western Canada, again, sharing in this cold. Everyone in purple under the extreme cold warning. And for Prince George northward, those are wind chills in the minus 40 to minus 50 range. For us in the white colors, those are special weather statements. So for the coast, we're talking 5 to 10 degrees below seasonal this week. And for the interior, 10 to 20 below seasonal. So we will see temperatures stick around on the cold side for at least a few more days. That chilly air is going to become downright cold as we head into Wednesday night and into Thursday. I think that's the coldest of our air mass, Anita and Mike. So as I track out that Arctic front, I'll tell you a little bit more later on in the show about our chances of that snow as we head into Wednesday, and if we'll see any bursts of flurries coming up this week.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Johanna.
You're welcome.
Well, many COVID-weary fans across North America are excited. A lot of pro sports are back in action.
Yes, but for two Abbotsford athletes who still can't play on their own teams, the pandemic is starting to feel endless.
Jamie Strachan is looking at the mental and emotional costs behind being benched.
For BC High School teammates Lauren Tomlinson and Nia Corshane, this was supposed to be a special season. One that would pave roads to the future and create lifelong memories.
For my high school senior season, that's also a good chance to be recruited, and it's obviously my last year playing basketball in high school, so that was obviously like a really important kind of milestone for me.
Few young athletes anywhere are playing actual games, and even in places where limited practice is allowed, it feels foreign.
We also lost the connection between us because there's a certain period at like the beginning of the season when you're training really hard and getting ready for your game, and then like your team kind of comes together in a way that you haven't before, and that's not really happening as much because you only see them in practice.
While COVID restrictions vary slightly by province and sport, every league and team has been affected. For hundreds of thousands of Canadian children, COVID began impacting their sports last winter. A year later, they are facing down another season of loss. During the last 10 months, it's a story this sports psychiatrist has repeatedly heard from young athletes and their families.
What I try to help people understand is this is a for now thing. This is not something that's going to be like this forever, and we need to use this as an opportunity to maybe fulfill our identities a little bit more, not just be that unidimensional athlete, but also, explore whatever else brings you joy and happiness and leisure.
A number of recent studies have documented the profound effect this pandemic is having on young Canadian athletes.
Being busy and sports especially have always been something that's actually helped my mental health a lot. So missing that aspect really sucks.
Nia's coach, like thousands of other Canadian coaches, has used platforms like Zoom to stay in touch and attempt to replicate what they can't teach in person.
All of you please go into the Google Classroom and take a look at the sideline out of bounds and end line out of bounds plays that we're going to be running in the season coming up. We did that a couple of times a week, and we talked about basketball for probably the first 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to personally sign off, but I'm going to leave the meeting open so that you guys can have a group discussion on your own. But most of it at the end was just me getting away from the computer and allowing them to interact with each other and have a conversation with each other about what was going on in their lives at that time.
I want to be born in 1955 so that I could grow up as a teen in the 70s because I love 70s music.
I think that I would like to live in like the roaring 20s, especially during this time, because like I'm really craving to like dress up and go out with people and like my friends.
But they were very open with each other about how they felt, and I think that the sharing, the communal sharing about where they were at, and so many of them were at the same place, was a very important thing, and I actually think it helped them.
As COVID continues to grip this country, no coach or player or parent is equating the loss of life this virus has caused to the loss of activity. But But everyone has been affected differently. For young athletes, COVID has stripped away joy and whittled away opportunity.
Because thinking about the future, it's too uncertain. It's kind of bleak to me. So I try my best to just focus on what I have right now and be grateful for that and pray that soon it will be fixed.
For The National, I'm Jamie Strachan in Toronto.
It's tough. You know, I've spoken to some other coaches in the Fraser Valley, basketball coaches, who said the same thing. Their players are just itching to get out there. Also worried that, you know, if you're trying to make it to university team next year, that you're kind of limiting yourself, right?
No, that's a good point. A lot of young athletes on the sidelines right now, for sure. Okay, just a quick reminder, you can also watch our newscasts live on CBC Gem.
CBC Vancouver is also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram.
South Africa has halted its rollout of the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine. Just ahead what several Western governments are saying about that country's decision. And thanks for staying with us online during our commercial-free live stream. Well, students in Winnipeg's Louis Riel School Division have a new way to explore sacred Anishinaabe sites through a video game.
As Leonard Monkman tells us, they're also getting the opportunity to learn from Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers.
So let's keep going, we're almost there.
These students are learning about Indigenous culture through the virtual world of Minecraft. The game is called Manitowabi Aki, which translates to the place where the creator sits. It is a new collaboration between Microsoft Canada and the Louis Riel School Division. Winter Cameron Catchaway is Anishinaabe and in grade 4 at Marion School and is one of the first to test out the game.
There's a bunch of animals and it's very interesting. You can build houses and you can build a community, find a bunch of interesting things.
The game invites students to explore what life was like for Anishinaabe people before the arrival of Europeans. The virtual world features local animals like the beaver and a northern pike, as well as local plants like sage and sweetgrass.
I think it's pretty cool.
Bobby Jo Leclerc is featured as a non-playable character and takes students on a tour inside the game. She said this version of Minecraft will give teachers a new way to teach Indigenous culture and history.
I think it's just an incredible way to begin teaching Indigenous perspectives for younger children. But also, I think it's a really great springboard for older students to learn about it and to go into deeper levels of the game.
Anthony Hart Aurelian is in grade 8. He said he's been able to learn more about what life was like for Indigenous people in Manitoba before the cities were built.
Learning about Indigenous people is something that you don't really learn about a lot, and so it's nice to get people to learn that, and in Minecraft, which is fun.
To then get the canoes in the water.
Principal Corey Kapelik said the project will feature teaching packages and will appeal to students of all backgrounds.
Through this game, I think our Indigenous students will say, well, you know, it's awesome. Their culture, their people are reflected in the game. And I think for non-Indigenous students, I think it's also super important because they could see the strength and the beauty and the sophistication of a culture that was here prior to the contact of Europeans.
While students are already playing Manitowabi Aki, everyone else will be able to explore the virtual Anishinaabe community when it's publicly launched on Wednesday. Leonard Monkman, CBC News, Winnipeg.
I don't know anything really about Minecraft, although it's very popular.
I think it's a game where you can, our producer Matt is telling us, where you can build real life scenarios. Is that right?
Yeah. Okay. No, but it's a different learning tool and one they're obviously using successfully there. So that's fantastic.
Yep.
Okay. Back in just a couple of seconds, more COVID-19 vaccine news from across the country and around the world. For now, here's a look at downtown Vancouver. A live shot at 6:23.
As the vast majority of Canadians wait their turn for a COVID-19 vaccine, one question is on the minds of many. How well will they work against the new variants?
So here's Vic Adopia now with findings out of South Africa that have some experts concerned and what they mean for our country.
The variant first identified in South Africa pushed the country's hospitals close to the brink last month. Now the desperately needed rollout of the AstraZeneca vaccine is on hold. After early signs, it failed to prevent most mild or moderate cases, raising questions about how effective it is against severe cases.
We don't want to end up with a situation where we vaccinated 1 million people or 2 million people with a vaccine that may not be effective in preventing hospitalization and severe disease.
AstraZeneca was considered the best hope against the coronavirus. It's much cheaper than other vaccines and considered 100% effective against severe infection. Canada pre-ordered 20 million doses. That was before the emergence of more contagious variants.
This is clearly concerning news. However, there are some important caveats.
While the WHO is worried, it points out the new data from South Africa is incomplete. It was based on a small group of young, low-risk patients, so more study is needed. But Europe isn't waiting. Several countries are racing to stay ahead of new variants as millions of vials of the newly approved vaccine arrive.
We've seen the first data set, from real-life infection from the heat of battle in South Africa, saying it's got reduced efficacy against those mild and moderate infections, but the jury's still out on what it means for severe or fatal infections.
Researchers say reconfiguring vaccines to target new variants is not only possible, it could be done relatively quickly.
This is a huge feat when we look at how we were previously making vaccines. So we're almost able to keep up with the virus.
If vaccines fail to control the spread of new variants, the world could be in for a longer and more costly battle against COVID-19. Vic Adopia, CBC News, Toronto.
The lawyer for a Montreal man falsely accused of the attempted murder of a police officer says her client has accepted an apology from the police chief. Mamadi Camara had been accused of disarming and injuring a constable during a routine traffic stop. He was arrested in his home and spent 6 nights in jail. The PhD student was exonerated of all charges after DNA evidence cleared him. Montreal's police chief says he will make an in-person apology as well. Camara is considering a civil lawsuit. The person responsible for the attack is still at large.
In Myanmar, pro-democracy demonstrators kept up the pressure on the military today with protests in the streets and a nationwide strike.
But as Renee Filipponi tells us, the generals who overthrew the government are cracking down on protesters.
Water cannons fired on a crowd of thousands, an attempt to drown out the voices of dissent in Myanmar's capital. For days now, protests against the military coup have grown to include civil disobedience and strikes. We're not going to allow this military dictatorship to pass on to our next generation, says this man. We will continue to protest till it fails. It's been a week since many politicians and activists were rounded up by the military, including Mia A, seen in this security video. His family hasn't heard from him since.
There are a lot of, baseless rumors going around as well, so we are quite worried about him.
Daughter Wei Hin not only worries about those in custody, but everyone on the streets. The military has been challenged by civilian uprisings twice before, in 1988 and 2007. Both times there was bloodshed.
People on the ground are risking their lives for human rights and democracy, but they need support and help from the international community.
A statement posted by the Embassy of Canada calls on the military to refrain from all forms of violence against peaceful protesters and to release those detained. We reached the ambassador in Yangon today.
At this point, we are still working on diplomacy, but other options are being explored. Of course, we're not the only country looking at that. We're trying to do the best we can to move the situation in a positive direction.
The military has justified its show of force with claims of widespread election fraud following the landslide victory of Aung San Suu Kyi. In his first address since the coup, General Min Aung Hlaing promised a new election under a reformed election commission. Tonight, his message was met by the sound of defiance. People on their balconies once again banging pots and pans as new curfews and rules on social gatherings are imposed. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, London.
Well, no more long lines for buses, no more pushing through crowds on SkyTrain platforms. While it may seem like a better commute, after the break, we tell you how much it could hurt the future of transit in this province.
The United Way says housing prices in Vancouver are so high, many people are going hungry just to pay for a roof over their heads. Housing prices in the city have jumped 80% in less than 9 months, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to attract new homeowners to the West Coast. Colin Hoth reports.
This home, which 2 years ago sold for $75,000, is on the market today for $245,000. A one-bedroom apartment in this ordinary block priced at $97,000, twice what it was a year ago. Vancouver companies are finding it more difficult to woo executives here from other parts of the country because of the high cost of housing. But it's the young people out to buy their first home who are the hardest hit. John and Judy Thomason were forced to move 55 kilometers out of the city to find a home priced under $100,000. They finished up buying this two-bedroom home for $95,000. Judy, a nurse, will have to work nights to help meet mortgage payments of almost $1,200 a month.
I make a pretty decent salary, and yet there's no way that we could buy this house without Judy going back to work.
I don't like being put in a position of almost desperation. We need, we have to buy a house to have some place to live. And, for the next 5 years, our lifestyle was pretty good. And we lived quite high, and now we're not going to be able to.
Economist Professor Michael Goldberg forecasts that today's Vancouver prices will soon become regarded as the norm for growth areas in Canada.
And that can happen certainly in a place like Newfoundland. It can happen in Alberta, and I would foresee it happening in Alberta as soon as the constitutional issue is settled. And I could see it happening in Montreal and in Toronto. All we need is a sudden surge in demand, and house prices take off.
The forces of supply and demand have now moderated the price spiral. There are more new homes being built, and demand has been slowed by the fact that so many young people are out of the market. Labour's current high wage demands are an attempt to get them back in. Colin Hoth, CBC News, Vancouver.
Some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
I'm monitoring for a number of things. Fewer cases in our communities, fewer outbreaks or unchecked transmission in places around the province. These are important signs that we are ready.
What will it take for BC to ease COVID-19 restrictions? Dr. Bonnie Henry says it's also important to have a better understanding of where the variants of concern are and how they're getting into our communities. She says her hope is once restrictions are lifted or eased, we will not have to revert back to stricter guidelines.
How do you translate the public health orders into something that's understandable, culturally relevant?
BC's South Asian community is being praised for efforts to bring down COVID-19 transmission rates. The province doesn't track race-based COVID data, but Surrey is home to the highest percentage of South Asians, and since November, cases there have gone down by more than half. Several community organizations have worked to create campaigns that specifically pertain to South Asians. Fraser Health says it's worked.
To hear the police be so dismissive about it and just say that it was fear-mongering was just really upsetting.
The RCMP is trying to reassure the public about missing women cases. On the weekend, investigators were criticized for telling people to stop spreading rumors. Mounties say numerous social media posts warning of the dangers in the Tri-Cities area are false.
Well, fewer people are taking buses and SkyTrains since the pandemic began.
And while it may seem like it spares commuters the ordeal of beating rush hour crowds, Yute Lee tells us this could lead to cuts in public transit.
In this episode of About Here, Yute explores public transportation systems and how much could change in our means of getting around.
You know what everyone needs right now? Another video about the pandemic. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit the planet, one of the first things everyone noticed was that people stopped moving. Nearly 5 million Canadians started working from home on top of the 2.8 million who were furloughed or laid off. Schools were closed, stores were closed, Denny's was closed. And the result? Empty roads, empty trains, empty buses, and a whole lot of uncertainty around what happens next. So let's start this story with something really exciting. Yeah, a graph. This graph shows the amount of people asking for driving directions through Apple Maps in Canada and how that's changed since January of this year. You see it drop rapidly in March as COVID cases first spiked in the country. Then, as the year went on, it gradually came back up before dropping back down again because we can't get our act together. But now compare that with public transit. In March, transit ridership across Canada dropped a whopping 83%, and the recovery since then has been much weaker. That makes sense. It can be really difficult to social distance on public transit, and frankly, it's way easier to keep your distance when you're surrounded by a steel box with windows. But all that has raised some concerns. We might be seeing a lot more traffic in the future. People that used transit before could switch to driving, adding more cars to the roads. And to top it off, more people appear to be moving from downtown areas into car-oriented suburbs. All that is a recipe for way more congestion. Many cities are already reporting traffic levels returning to normal, and in London, congestion levels are actually higher than they were last year. Now, there's another key factor to consider here. Remote work. A lot of people are working from home right now, so the amount of traffic that returns to our roads also really depends on the amount of people that return to physical offices after this pandemic. But I'm going to avoid opening up that whole can of worms because regardless of what happens to offices, there's still another issue here. Public transit is in trouble. With low ridership, virtually every public transit provider in Canada is struggling to stay afloat. Most have needed government support through grants such as the Safe Restart Agreement, except for New Brunswick because they said no thank you to free money? Okay. Anyways, if there isn't a full recovery before these grants run out, these transit systems will almost certainly be facing cuts. Cities in the United States have already made cuts to their public transit, and in Ontario, there are concerns that the provincial government will privatize and cut public transit services as the pandemic progresses. But there is one transportation method I haven't brought up yet: arms and legs, or what normal people call active transportation. Bikes, walking, scooters, and other physical methods. The pandemic has made these options very popular. In Vancouver, bike counters observed a huge increase in cyclists this spring compared to the previous year, and Toronto has reported similar increases as well. These methods are relatively cheap, they don't clog up precious road space, and they allow for social distancing, all while not contributing to the heat death of the planet. With that, many see active transportation as a way forward during this pandemic. From what we found, 19 of the largest 25 cities across Canada have implemented major active transportation projects this year. Toronto is fast-tracking 40 kilometers of new bike lanes, Montreal added 327 kilometers of bicycle and pedestrian paths, and Vancouver shut down Stanley Park to car traffic, creating a new route for cyclists. Many cities have also taken advantage of empty streets and converted that space for patios and small parks. which have led to some interesting scenarios, like this patio with a tree inside it, or this patio with a bus stop inside it, or this patio next to a demolition site. These are promising changes that could help more people feel comfortable using active transportation. But can bikes and scooters fully replace cars in transit? Well, that's where I get a bit more skeptical. Take a look at this map showing commuting flow in Metro Vancouver. Looks pretty cool, but the key thing to notice is that most people commute into downtown Vancouver from outer suburbs like Burnaby, Surrey, and the North Shore. These are long distances. It would take 2 hours to cycle from Surrey Central to Vancouver, or 5.5 hours by walking. It just makes way more sense to drive or take transit. As a stubborn cyclist myself, this is a tough pill to swallow, but the reality is that active transportation projects can only go so far to address the full scope of transportation issues during this pandemic, and that makes me concerned about who we might be overlooking. These commuting patterns exist for good reason. Vancouver has some of the highest real estate prices in the world, and many people who work in the city just can't afford to live in the city. An average 2-bedroom apartment in Vancouver costs $2,500 a month. In Surrey, that same apartment would cost just $1,200 a month. You can see that dynamic really reflected in the median incomes across Metro Vancouver. Those with higher incomes can afford to live close to bikeable and walkable downtown areas. Those with lower incomes tend to live in the outskirts. That's a common pattern in many cities today. In 2019, The Economist reported that the poor are increasingly clustered together outside newly thriving central cities, and thus out of sight. But in Metro Vancouver, many of those lower income neighborhoods have a key advantage. Take a look at that map again. Many of those lower income neighborhoods in Metro Vancouver are connected to a network of SkyTrain routes, our version of subways, and that is a big deal. A national study in the US found that commuting time was the single strongest factor in the odds of escaping poverty, more than crime rates and elementary school test scores. Fast and reliable transportation connects people to more opportunities and ultimately helps them move up in society. But I don't need a study to tell me that. When I first moved to Vancouver, I could only afford to live with my parents in Langley, a suburb 4 cities away from the downtown. I was unemployed, broke, and admittedly a bit lost. But what I did have available to me was a recently opened bus route called the 555. It could take me directly to a SkyTrain station, which took me straight to downtown Vancouver. That commute helped me land my first part-time job downtown, a foot in the door that ultimately led to the opportunities I have today. That's why I'm especially concerned about this issue. Changes in our transportation network don't just affect our mobility, they affect our social mobility. More congestion on the roads or a weaker public transit system will put up way more barriers for people who are trying to improve their lives. So, with that in mind, here are some other ideas. Many cities have used this pandemic to actually invest more in their public transit networks. Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and Boston have introduced new bus lanes to ensure that transit gets priority on the streets as traffic returns. In Missoula, Austin, and the Bay Area, citizens have actually voted for new taxes to directly fund transit. Yeah, more taxes. And one of my favorite ideas comes from my hometown of Vancouver, where the Transit Authority might get into the housing development business to create more revenue. Then there are more controversial ideas. In Vancouver, the city is also considering a congestion charge, basically tolls for cars driving into the downtown core. And, I don't really have the answers for what will or won't work. These issues are complex, and I'm just a guy that makes videos for the internet. But working on this story has helped me recognize one thing. For many people, having access to a good form of transportation is a lifeline. And I think prioritizing that will help a lot of people move on from here.
Only the highway can come between us.
It's a Canadian initiative to promote Black-owned businesses. Just ahead, how one entrepreneur is hoping to push the Buy Black movement into higher gear.
6:43, there's a live shot of the Port of Vancouver on this Monday evening. Well, we appear to have survived the blizzard today. In fact, just a few snow flurries in some areas this morning. And the chilly temperatures are going to be with us for the next several days. How cold will it get? Johanna's forecast is next.
I was even called the N-word in McDonald's one time. I was waiting for my order, and the dude was like, "That's your order, N-word," and I was like it didn't click at first, but after about a half hour, so I was like, this dude, you know, he just said that to me. When I first moved here, a lot of times I'd be walking on the street and a white person would be coming towards me and they would cross over to the other side. I remember one time, I literally just got off the phone with somebody. I was looking for some apartments, and in like the 10 minutes it took me to get there, he looked at me and he was like, "It's okay, space is taken." Yeah, that's been my experience with racism on PEI. Hey everybody, my name is Chavez Etchcombe. I'm from Nassau, Bahamas. I moved here to PEI to study marketing and advertising at Holland College, and I'm happy to be here. So my story starts when I was about 2 years old, when I was diagnosed with hemophilia. It's a blood disorder where my blood doesn't clot as quickly. In my younger, like say 5 to 8, I felt very left out, but because of my hemophilia, a lot of people didn't know what it was, so it's like, you just go sit on the side. I was a bit of a rebel sometimes. It was like my way of acting out, dealing with all of that, whatever I was dealing with, emotionalness and things like that. But as I grew older, I started to gain more confidence in myself and knowing myself more, and that's when I started to really try and motivate and help other people who feel as though they less off or not good enough. And I would motivate my friends and have them try new things, face their fears as I face mine, and it was a good companion. It's just good having someone to do it with, you know what I mean? It's rather than doing it by yourself.
Pushing the pepper on Saturday, living my life like Hemingway, dripping the vibe heavily, coming alive.
So I'm a hip-hop music producer. Chevron is like a alter ego that I go into. Anything artistic that I do, I like to go into that headspace of Chevron, because he's the artist. He's the one that does what he wants and how he wants. In June, I participated in the Black Lives Matter march here on PEI. That was liberating, I'd say. Just to be able to stand up for that type of cause and be surrounded with like-minded people. I feel very proud being a part of that history, you know what I mean? Black History Month, what it means to me is a time to go back in history and focus on the works that was done before, and to see how we could educate ourselves on what they did right and what they did wrong, so we could move forward as a people. So what I want people to take away from that is to just educate yourself more about the situations in the BIPOC community, and try to relate and see how it's different from your situation and maybe how you could help out. And I want the people in the BIPOC community to get from this is that change begins with yourself. Like, if you want change to happen, you need to change yourself, change your thinking, and eventually your environment will change as well.
Record-setting cold has settled in across the prairies and is expected to last until the end of the week. A polar vortex delivered a mass of frigid air that has broken more than 20 cold weather records in the region. Cold weather warnings are in place across Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba tonight. Many schools have been closed in all 3 provinces because of safety concerns. Wind chill values will have it feeling like minus 55 degrees Celsius in some areas.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never lived anywhere else in Canada, so I have no idea what that feels like. That sounds terrifying.
Do you even feel it?
Yeah. In fact, I was trying to think earlier today. I think the coldest was a minus 37 wind chill once in Toronto. But yeah, the minus 50 is reserved for very few Canadians. It's not really an honor, but that is what's happening across the West today. It's actually the same air mass that's filtering west, and that will be continuing to cool our temperatures down. By the time it gets to the coast, it's modified, so we're not getting that cold, but parts of BC will be getting close. I want to take you back, though, to the other story today, the burst of flurries, as we mentioned earlier. Oh, that's very Vancouver, umbrella for the flurries. Yeah, it was, we had flurries in the forecast, but it ended up turning way more convective. Actually seen some accumulations in South Granville, parts of East Van for a moment, and on the North Shore, seeing covering of the grass and the roofs, we'll say, before dissipating. But we might see some more of these flurry bursts as we head into the forecast Tuesday and Wednesday. Let's take a look at where that Arctic air mass is right now. The pinks, that's the true polar vortex. It's beginning to filter across the Rockies. You can see a -23 in through Prince George right now. And it's those outflow winds, the winds coming through the valleys from the interior towards the coast, that actually collided with a bit of Pacific air, and that's what gave us the lift for the flurries today. The boundary, or the front, the leading edge of that cold front has not yet reached the south coast, so we are getting colder before we get warmer, which is a few days to come. As I mentioned, the heart of the wind chills and the extreme wind chill warnings in place across the prairies, and that is definitely where it is dangerously cold. So right now, I'm calling this a chilly air mass across the south. It is going to get colder, stopping you tomorrow evening. We're going to see that band of snow track down towards the southern interior. And by Wednesday morning, you can see the forecast model showing some snow across the south coast. So we'll be watching that timing closely to see who might get what, again, Tuesday overnight into Wednesday as the official Arctic front actually arrives in our region. And that may bring, again, some lift and some precipitation. Lots of sunshine across the province tomorrow, -22 up towards Prince George, but wind chills will be bringing those temperatures down into the -30 range. -12 out towards Cranbrook and Kelowna. Your wind chills tomorrow morning around -18. Quick look at those daily highs across the south, because you can see that air mass expand as we head into Wednesday. Temperatures dropping a couple of more degrees, and that is when we will get into the heart of our coldest air Wednesday overnight into Thursday. So there is a chance our daytime highs on Thursday will not even reach the freezing mark. Watching for that snow on Wednesday. May see a few flurries fly on Friday. A good looking but cold weekend. Don't really see a change in this weather pattern until early next week. So hunker down for some cold air, whether you like it or not.
Okay, I've got nothing to say but brr.
That's the appropriate response.
Thanks, Johanna.
Well, the Black Lives Matter movement has inspired a renewed desire to support Black-owned businesses.
As Jacqueline Hansen tells us, the push to buy Black has a long history and a challenge toward making it sustainable.
Tucked away in a Toronto strip mall, a recent business school grad's first venture, Royalty Coffee.
I'm ethnically from Africa, sourcing a product close to Somalia. It kind of feels like home.
To help spread the word about her new company beyond her own community, Adil Hassan Mohammed contacted Black-owned Toronto, an Instagram account and website that puts a spotlight on Black-owned businesses in the city. Days later, the account's founder shared the story of Royalty Coffee to her tens of thousands of followers. Mohammed says she got many followers as a result and more sales.
I've gotten a lot of people to make purchases, and that was my overall goal.
Now the local initiative is going national. Businesses from across the country can sign up to be part of Black-owned Canada, a new searchable directory and expanded online store.
Wherever you are in Canada, you'll be able to go on the website and find what's around you that's Black-owned.
Global searches for Black-owned spiked in May and June of last year as the Black Lives Matter movement took off. But the idea of buying Black goes back decades, and so do Black-owned directories.
This is actually bringing back something that seemed to just like fizzle out in the 2000s.
Other online directories have launched since then, like Afrobiz and Buy Blacks. But this professor says the challenge historically had been getting people to know they exist.
A Black directory still leaves it on the individual to have the desire to go and find those things.
Still, she says there's even more power to be found in businesses banding together.
We have to realize in the 21st century, if there's going to be any progress for especially Black community, we have to do that together. We have to be a collective.
For Mohammed, Black-owned Canada is part of that.
joining forces and working together, it helps.
So she can focus on the daily grind and keep new customers coming back. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
After the break, why the frigid weather didn't stop one woman determined to make it down the hill. She shows us that you're never too old to hit the slopes.
I remember my parents used to take us in the car at Christmas time and drive us around South End neighborhoods to see the Christmas lights.
Leighton Burton says he first heard the terms north and south of Dewdney, or NOD and SOD, when he was a kid growing up in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And the self-proclaimed NODer says the list of assumptions grew as he did.
There was this fallacy that all North Enders had muscle cars.
According to longtime Regina real estate agent and former city councillor Jerry Flagel, those stereotypes were fueled by high schoolers. For the most part, he says it came from Tom and O'Neill students in the north and Miller and Balfour students in the south. Dewdney Avenue fell roughly in the middle, and thus north and south of Dewdney was born. The gist of the teasing was based on class stereotypes, with the co-op refinery in Evraz, or IPSCO as it was known back then, in the north. People who lived in that end of town were labeled blue-collar workers. Then, with the legislative building and the university in the south, that's where the politicians, academics, or white-collar workers lived. And with those things in mind came the trash talking.
But the biggest one, it was always like the north was always like the rough and tough and everything. And the South End people, and originally it was the South End, they got the tag South End cake eaters.
Burton says he never had plans to move south, to jokingly have his cake and eat it too, until he met his south of Dewdney, or SOD wife, Susan Smetana.
He didn't disclose he was NOD.
But Smetana says her push to stay south had nothing to do with the classist and generally baseless stereotypes over the years. Instead, growing up across from Wascana Park, she says it was a desire to feel at home.
Your friends all end up being in the same neighborhood, so it's pretty compelling to stay in the vicinity.
And as you're watching this, you may be wondering, is that NOD versus SOD rivalry still alive today? Well, I went to find out.
NOD and SOD, do you guys know what it is?
No.
You've never heard of it?
Never.
And have you ever heard of north of Dewdney, south of Dewdney, that rivalry?
No, I have not.
I know, it kind of sounds old school, not gonna lie.
So I think it's because we're the end of the baby boom. So this is the glut of people in our age group that are also trying to hold on to a little bit of the past and enjoying and having fun with that.
I still consider this body to be NOD and some of my sensibilities, but I have to admit, and I've admitted this to some of my good north of Dewdney friends, that I'm a South Ender now, and I'm happy to be a South Ender. She's what brought me here, and it's been the best of, I guess I've been able to live the best of both worlds.
Jesse Anton, CBC News, Regina.
We deal with freezing temperatures and music playing. A snowstorm is marching its way across Atlantic Canada. It's keeping many people inside, of course, where it's nice and warm.
However, there was one adventurous senior who braved the outdoors. Colleen Connors now with the 90-year-old who is determined to get out and glide.
Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday to you!
Peggy Jacobs was not expecting this today.
I don't know how I should feel, but I feel wonderful.
Yeah?
Yeah.
An empty lodge on this snow day, and the ski club members and her family surprised her with a cake, with her picture on it, and a couple candles to mark the special day.
Well, I ski every birthday, regardless what the weather. So I'm going to ski today, maybe for 5 minutes, just around the block there. And I'll say I skied on my 90th birthday.
Yep, you heard right, 90 years old today.
Well, I've been skiing all my life. I started skiing when I was a child. The first pair of skis I've had, my father made me, tell you the truth.
No way.
He made me out of birch. Yeah, he cut the wood and made them himself. It's hard. Well, I figure as long as I can walk, I can ski. It's easy to ski than to walk, tell you the truth. I'm a loner anyway. I ski alone. I like skiing alone. I can do what I want to do in the country. I go in, I sit down, relax sometimes, and I have my lunch, and I feed the blue jays.
But today she made an exception, and her 2 grandchildren joined in for the fun.
I think it's pretty crazy that we got this weather and she's still going to go try it anyways, but it's nice to see. It just shows that drive and determination, you know, like to get out and have fun and stay committed to doing it and being active, and it is really inspiring to see.
So, what is the secret to a healthy life at 90 years old?
I guess healthy living, exercise, no alcohol, no smoking, no drugs.
That's the key?
That's the key. No, good living, I guess, exercise.
And a good slice of birthday cake. Colleen Connors, CBC News, Corner Brook.
Nice to see. We got snow here today as well. Not as much as they've got there, though, that's for sure.
Just a few flakes.
Yeah.
Still looks pretty. It's all gone now. You can always catch our newscasts online anytime, cbc.ca/BC.
Good night.